At 6 months old, I cried non-stop. No doctor could explain it. Desperate, my wealthy parents hired a baby whisperer who claimed she could translate infant thoughts. The moment she entered, she diagnosed me a splinter in my toe. My parents checked she was right. They trusted her blindly after that. Months later, I refused my mother's milk. The whisperer told them, "She says you're not her real mother. She'll steal your fortune for her real parents and wishes you die soon." Leaving her, my parents cast me out and brought home their real daughter. I was sent to a rundown trailer park, where neglect and hunger defined my childhood. When I opened my eyes, I was back on the day the whisperer first arrived. This time, after they removed the splinter, I screamed even louder. I had been reborn in my past life. My memories began in a desolate backwater town. I had no mother, only a father named Silas, who was a hopeless gambler. Whenever he lost a bet, he beat me. I lived hand to mouth, never knowing when my next meal would come. By the age of 10, I was smaller than a healthy 6-year-old. When I turned 12, Silas's debts piled up so high, he sold me to a local loan shark. I fought back when the man tried to touch me, cracked my skull against a table corner, and died in the dark. Only after my death did my infant memories return. I realized I was born into a life of luxury because of a clever con artist. I was labeled an ungrateful fake daughter and discarded. Seeing Martha's face now filled me with a mixture of terror and rage. But I was too small to fight back or tell my parents the truth. All I could do was cry harder. Brian's brow furrowed again. He stared sharply at Martha. "I thought you said she was crying because of the splinter. We took it out. Why is she crying even louder now?" I glared at Martha with all the intensity my tiny eyes could muster. "If only you could actually hear me. You miserable fraud, I would curse you to hell." In my past life, my spirit had hovered over my biological home. After my death, I saw the real daughter grown up. She looked exactly like Martha. My parents eventually grew suspicious, conducted a DNA test, and uncovered the truth. They were too soft-hearted. Even in their rage, they could not bring themselves to punish the girl they had raised for 18 years. In the end, that ungrateful girl stole Brian's company's secrets and handed them to his biggest rival. Brian's empire collapsed and my parents' lives became a living hell. Martha's face flashed with a brief moment of panic, but she recovered instantly. "How strange," she murmured, looking down at me with mock sympathy. "The young miss is saying she is crying because she despises your touch." I was so angry I flailed my tiny fists, wanting to strike her. She was already setting up the narrative of the ungrateful child. Eleanor's face fell, her voice turning cold. "They say you are the best nanny in the city, and I paid a fortune to borrow you from the Vanderbilt family. But this is just nonsense. If you're going to keep driving a wedge between me and my daughter, get out." Martha did not flinch. She stepped forward and gently picked me up. "I only report what the baby soul is whispering, ma'am." I cried, with everything I had to prove her wrong. But as Martha held me, she slightly brought a small cloth near my nose. A sweet, chemical scent filled my lungs, and a heavy drowsiness hit me. Instantly, before I blacked out, I saw her lay me back down in the crib. "See, now that you are not holding her, she is quieted down. If you do not believe me, there is nothing more I can do. I should return to the Vanderbilts. Their young master is waiting." She took 3 steps toward the door. Brian cleared his throat, stopping her.
"Wait. Stay.
"We will double your salary. Just find out why Jenny is rejecting us." Eleanor sighed, rubbing her temples.
You are right, Brian.
I shouldn't have lost my temper. Maybe she just dislikes our perfume or the scent of our clothes. "No, Dad. Don't listen to her. Let her leave." I screamed in my head, but darkness consumed me. When I woke up, Martha was officially installed as my full-time nanny. Furious, I spat at her face when she leaned over my crib. "Get away from me, you monster." Martha wiped her cheek, a cruel smirk appearing on her face. "Feisty little thing, aren't you? Enjoy your comfortable days while they last. I won't hold a grudge against a baby." She leaned closer, whispering in my ear. "Do you know how hard I worked to secure a golden life for my daughter? Out of all the wealthy families, yours was the only one with a baby born on the exact same day, in the same hospital. It is a bit of a downgrade for my girl to wait, but she will get what is hers eventually." I wailed, trying to alert my parents. Eleanor walked into the nursery. "What is going on?" Martha secretly pinched my thigh hard, her fingers twisting the skin. "I think the baby sensed you coming, ma'am. She was perfectly calm just a second ago." I tried to stop crying, but the physical pain was too much. The harder she pinched, the louder I screamed. Eleanor looked at me with a complicated, hurt expression before turning away. As soon as she left, Martha drugged me again. The next day, Martha offered me a bottle of Eleanor's pumped breast milk. The moment it touched my lips, she pinched me again. The young miss says she finds your scent disgusting. Ma'am, Martha lied, looking regretful. Because I had always struggled with feeding, Eleanor believed her. Then Martha offered a formula she had bought. I clamped my jaws shut, but Martha used the drug again. In my semi-conscious state, she forced the bottle down my throat. See, ma'am, she has no problem with formula. This happened repeatedly until my parents trusted her completely. Eleanor grew more anxious by the day. One evening, she asked Brian, "Why does our baby hate us so much?" Brian looked at Martha. "Has she said anything else? Is it our clothes? Our scent?" Martha knew her moment had come. She dropped to her knees, looking terrified. "Actually, the young miss has said some things. I didn't dare repeat them because they were so shocking, but she has repeated them so many times. I am certain of what she is saying." At Brian's nod, she continued, "She says she hates your touch because you are not her real parents. She says when she grows up, she will take your wealth to honor her real family. And she wishes you would both die soon so she can inherit everything. My past life." Those words became a thorn in my parents' hearts. Even after finding their real daughter, they initially wanted to keep me, but Martha's relentless psychological dripping wore them down. Later, she framed me for hurting the real daughter, and they finally sent me away. Now I watched my parents anxiously. Brian's expression was unreadable. Eleanor was furious. "This is ridiculous. She is 6 months old. Even if she weren't ours, how could an infant say such things?" Martha remained calm and solemn. Every soul has a script they read before reincarnating. God makes babies mute for the first year, because it takes that long for the veil of forgetfulness to fully set in. My parents did not fully believe it, but the seed of doubt was planted. Over the next few weeks, Martha kept reporting my thoughts. Most were trivial things, like which toys I liked or which clothes I preferred. But she masterfully slipped in poison. "The young miss says your real daughter is starving in a filthy backwater town. She says her real father is a man named Silas, a proud, strong man.
She seems happy today. She says,
Your real daughter is about to be beaten to death by her gambling father, and then no one will compete with her." My parents looked at me with growing distress. Slowly, Eleanor broke. "Brian, what if it is true? Let's just run an investigation. We have nothing to lose." "But if our real daughter is out there?" Brian agreed and sent his assistant to investigate. Very quickly, they tracked down a baby girl of my exact age, living with a gambler named Silas in a rural trailer park. The moment they brought the real daughter back, they ran a DNA test. The results came back that afternoon. She was a perfect match. The moment the results were revealed, Eleanor wept, clutching the baby girl, whom they named Daisy. "My poor baby, you have suffered so much." I lay in my crib nearby. Eleanor did not even look at me. Brian, being cautious, ordered an investigation into how the swap happened. The assistant quickly reported back that a negligent nurse at the hospital had mixed up the bassinet tags. With that, Brian's doubts vanished. He held Eleanor and Daisy close.
"We are whole now."
Martha stood behind them, barely concealing her triumphant smirk. She had successfully secured a life of infinite wealth for her daughter. I cried, terrified. Was history repeating itself? My crying drew my parents' attention. "Jenny has been with us for months," Eleanor said softly, looking conflicted. "We aren't strapped for cash. We can afford to raise her, too. Let's keep her." Martha chimed in immediately. "Have you forgotten what she said? She is a danger to this house." Brian sighed. "If what you say is true, the forgetfulness will kick in soon. She is just a baby. We will raise her right." Martha paled. She knew that as long as I stayed, my physical resemblance to my parents would eventually expose the truth. Over the next few days, I did everything I could to crawl away whenever Daisy was near, depriving Martha of any opportunity to frame me. Frustrated, Martha finally lost her patience. One afternoon, while Eleanor was in her room and Brian was in his study, Martha grabbed my hand and tried to force my fingernails into Daisy's skin. I clenched my fist tight, refusing to scratch her. Seeing that Daisy wasn't crying, Martha grew desperate. She grabbed my hand, squeezed my fingers, and used her own sharp nail to slice a deep gash into Daisy's arm. Daisy screamed in pain. Martha wailed at the top of her lungs. "Brian, Eleanor, help." My parents rushed into the nursery. Martha was kneeling, cradling a crying Daisy. I walked in and saw Jenny clawing at Daisy. She looks so vicious. Not like a baby at all. The air in the nursery of the Vanderbilt adjacent estate was thick, smelling of expensive lavender wax, baby powder, and the sharp, metallic tang of fresh
Blood.
Daisy's screams were piercing. The infant, barely a few months old, wailed with a raw, high-pitched terror that vibrated against the high plaster ceilings.
On
The plush carpet, Martha knelt, her face a masterclass in manufactured horror. She cradled Daisy against her chest, her hands trembling with a performance so practiced it could have won awards on any stage. Brian. Eleanor. Help. Martha's voice cracked perfectly, carrying down the long, arched hallway. The heavy oak doors burst open. Brian entered first, his brow furrowed, his eyes scanning the room with the sharp, calculating gaze of a man who ruled a financial empire. Directly behind him was Eleanor, her face pale, her hands flying to her mouth as she saw the blood dripping down Daisy's tiny, pale arm. What happened? Eleanor gasped, rushing forward and dropping to her knees beside Martha. My baby. What did she do to her? I tried to stop her, ma'am. Martha wept, her tears flowing freely now.
I
Walked in and Jenny, she was hovering over the crib. She looked, possessed, ma'am. Her little hands were clawing at Daisy's face and arms.
I
Tried to pull her away, but she was so vicious. It was like she wanted to tear her apart. Eleanor reached out to take Daisy, her eyes filled with tears of panic and anger. She cast a look of utter betrayal and disgust toward my crib. I lay there, my tiny 6-month-old heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. My chest heaved. The physical pain in my right hand was excruciating. I wanted to scream, to point, to speak the language of adults and expose this venomous viper. But my vocal cords could only produce ragged, desperate wails. Look at my hand. I screamed in my mind, staring at my father. Look at my wrist.
please.
In my past life, this was the exact moment my fate was sealed. The sight of Daisy's blood had blinded my parents to all logic. They had believed Martha's whispers that I was a demon, a fake child born of malice, destined to destroy their family. They had cast me out that very week, sending me to Silas, the gambler, the monster who would eventually end my life in the dark when I was
12.
But this time, I would not let history repeat itself.
I did not just cry.
I raised my right hand high into the air, shaking it violently, forcing myself to wail louder every time my wrist moved. Brian, who had been staring at Daisy's wound, suddenly paused. His eyes, cold and analytical, shifted from Martha's weeping face to my crib.
He stepped
Closer. Brian, do something, Eleanor cried, cradling Daisy. We have to get Jenny out of this room. She's dangerous. Martha was right. She hates us. She hates Daisy. Eleanor, wait, Brian said, his voice dropping to a quiet, dangerous register. He walked over to my crib and looked down at me. I stopped flailing my hand and held it perfectly still in the air, palm open, fingers trembling, on my delicate, porcelain-white baby skin. The contrast was horrifying. Around my tiny wrist, there were 5 distinct, deep purple bruises. They were shaped like the tips of adult fingers, bruises left by someone who had gripped my wrist with immense, crushing force to drag my hand toward Daisy's crib. More than that, my knuckles were clean. There was not a single speck of blood on my fingernails. But on my right palm, there was a long, thin red scratch, not from a baby's nail, but from the sharp, manicured edge of an adult's fingernail that had slipped. During the struggle, Brian's eyes narrowed to tiny slits. He reached down, his large, warm hand gently cradling my tiny elbow. The moment his fingers brushed the bruised skin, I let out a sharp, genuine shriek of physical pain, my tiny body flinching away. What is this? Brian whispered, his voice dangerously calm. Martha's crying faltered for a fraction of a second. She quickly recovered, smoothing her apron. Sir, I told you. I had to grab her. She was attacking Daisy. I had to use force to pull her away. She was fighting me so hard. You grabbed her? Brian turned around slowly. His posture was rigid, the posture of a predator that had just spotted a flaw in the landscape. You are a trained, professional nanny, Martha. You have worked for some of the wealthiest families in the country. Are you telling me that to restrain a 6-month-old infant you had to grip her wrist so hard that you left deep, structural bruises? Martha's face grew slightly stiff. She has unnatural strength, sir.
When?
She is angry. It's like she's not a baby at all. The soul inside her is. Enough about the soul, Brian snapped, his voice ringing like a iron bell in the quiet nursery. Eleanor, look at this. Eleanor, still holding the crying Daisy, looked up. Her eyes went from my bruised wrist to my clean, bloodless fingers. She was a mother, and despite the psychological manipulation she had suffered over the past few weeks, the sight of deep bruises on her child's flesh struck a chord of primal instinct. How? How could she scratch Daisy if there is no blood on her hands? Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling. She must have wiped it on the sheets. Martha offered quickly, her voice rising in pitch. Or maybe she used her feet. Babies are very flexible, ma'am. It was a ridiculous claim, born of sudden panic. I am calling Dr. Sterling, Brian said, pulling out his phone. And I am calling the family legal team. Nobody leaves this room. Dr. Sterling, the family's trusted private pediatrician, arrived within 20 minutes. The atmosphere in the nursery was suffocating. Martha sat on a chair in the corner, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, her eyes darting toward the
door.
She was calculating her escape, but Brian's private security guards were already stationed outside the nursery doors. Dr. Sterling immediately began examining Daisy's arm. He cleaned the wound, applying a sterile dressing. How is she, doctor? Eleanor asked, her eyes red from weeping. It's a superficial laceration, Eleanor, Dr. Sterling said, adjusting his glasses. But it is quite straight and clean. A baby's fingernails are soft, thin and prone to tearing. When a baby scratches, the wound is usually jagged, uneven, and rarely penetrates the dermis so cleanly. This scratch. He paused, looking at Martha, then back at Brian. This scratch was caused by a hard, thick, well-kept nail, like an adult's manicured nail. Martha's breath hitched. Doctor, you don't understand the physical anomalies of children who are. I am a man of science, Martha, Dr. Sterling interrupted coldly. I do not diagnose souls. He then walked over to my crib. I lay perfectly still, pretending to be exhausted, but my eyes were wide, watching his every move. He gently picked up my right hand. I let out a soft, pitiful whimper. These bruises, Dr. Sterling muttered, his brow furrowing. These are fresh. Within the last hour. The bruising pattern is a classic adult grip, specifically, a thumb and 3 fingers pressing into the radius and ulna. The force required to cause this kind of deep tissue bruising on an infant is significant. If this had been a simple pull to rescue another child, the grip would have slipped. This was a sustained, crushing hold. Eleanor stepped back, her face draining of color. She looked at Martha, then at
Me.
For the first time in months, she saw me not as a demon or an ungrateful fake, but as a bruised, suffering infant. Martha, Eleanor whispered, her voice shaking. What did you do to my baby? Ma'am, I swear to you, I was protecting Daisy. Martha cried, throwing herself to her knees. You cannot listen to this. The baby whisperer's gift is real.
Why?
Would I lie to you? I have brought you your real daughter. Look at Daisy. She is your flesh and blood. Why would I harm Jenny? I knew this was my moment. I couldn't speak, but I could direct their attention. I began to squirm, pointing my left arm toward Martha's large, designer nanny tote bag sitting on the changing table. I let out a loud, coughing sound, mimicking the gasping breath I took whenever she drugged me. The bag, I thought desperately. Look in her bag. I kept staring at the bag, then looking at Eleanor, then back at the bag, letting out a small, raspy cry. Brian, whose observational skills were legendary in the business world, noticed my persistent gaze. He walked over to the changing table and picked up Martha's
bag.
Mr. Vanderbilt, please. Martha gasped, rising to her feet, her composure completely shattering. That is my personal property. You have no right. In my house, under suspicion of child abuse, I have every right, Brian said coldly. He unzipped the bag and turned it upside down, dumping its contents onto the changing table. Out fell diapers, wet wipes, a rattle, a small notebook, and a small, dark glass vial with a dropper, along with a piece of soft, white flannel cloth wrapped in a Ziploc bag. Brian picked up the vial. The label had been scraped off, but a faint, sweet, chemical scent clung to the glass.
Dr.
Sterling's eyes went wide. He stepped forward and took the vial from Brian's
hand.
He unscrewed the cap slightly, took a cautious sniff, and his face turned
Grim.
Isoflurane, Dr. Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave. It's a highly potent inhalational anesthetic commonly used in veterinary medicine and clinical research. In small doses, applied to a cloth, it can induce instant drowsiness and semi-consciousness in an infant. It is incredibly dangerous.
A
Slight overdose can cause respiratory depression, brain damage, or cardiac arrest. Eleanor let out a horrified shriek. She fell to her knees, clutching her stomach, as if she had been physically struck. The sweet scent. Eleanor choked out, her tears cascading down her cheeks. Every time Jenny quieted down for you, Martha.
She smelled like this.
I thought it was your perfume. I thought she loved your scent. No, it's not what it looks like. Martha stammered, backing toward the window. I use that to sleep. I have chronic insomnia. I would never give it to the baby. We will test Jenny's blood, Dr. Sterling said immediately, his voice filled with professional fury. If there are trace elements of isoflurane or its metabolites in her system, it will be undeniable proof of systematic poisoning. The next 12 hours were a blur of cold, clinical efficiency. Brian did not call the local police immediately. He knew that with Martha's reputation and her connections to other wealthy families, a premature arrest might allow her legal team to suppress evidence or post bail and vanish. Instead, he placed the mansion under a complete lockdown. Martha was confined to a guest room on the 3rd floor, guarded by 4 of Brian's personal security.
Detail.
I was taken to a private medical clinic owned by Brian's conglomerate. There, Dr. Sterling oversaw a comprehensive panel of tests. By midnight, the results were back. My blood work showed clear, undeniable traces of isoflurane and a mild sedative. The skin on my wrist was photographed. The bruises documented by a forensic medical examiner. I lay in a sterile, white hospital crib, hooked up to a mild hydration drip. Eleanor sat beside me, her eyes swollen, her hair disheveled. She held my uninjured hand, weeping silently. I'm so sorry, Jenny, she whispered, her voice cracking with a pain that went down to her soul. My sweet, innocent girl. How could I have been so blind? I let a monster poison you. I let her tell me you hated me. I squeezed her finger with what little strength I had. I wanted her to know I didn't hate her. I had never hated her. In my past life, I had died wanting nothing more than her warmth. While Eleanor watched over me, Brian was in his study at the estate, surrounded by a team of private investigators led by a man named Vance, a former high-ranking intelligence officer who now handled corporate espionage and high-stakes personal security for the Vanderbilt family. We have the preliminary report on Martha's background, Mr. Vanderbilt, Vance said, placing a thick leather folder on the mahogany desk. And it is far more sinister than a simple case of a nanny gone rogue. Tell me everything, Brian said, his eyes reflecting the cold light of his laptop screen. First, the baby, Daisy, Vance began. We ran a background check on the gambler, Silas. He lives in a trailer park 3 hours north. 2 weeks ago, he was suddenly cleared of a $60,000 debt to a local loan shark. The money was wired from a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. We traced the ultimate beneficiary of that shell company. It belongs to Martha. Brian's hands clenched into fists. So Martha paid Silas to keep Daisy.
Yes.
But it goes deeper, Vance said, flipping open a page in the folder.
We
investigated the hospital where Jenny and Daisy were born. The nurse who, allegedly, mixed up the bassinet tags due to negligence is named Clara Higgins. She resigned 3 days after the incident and moved to Spain. We tracked her bank accounts. She received a transfer of $100,000 from the same Cayman shell company. And Clara Higgins' relation to Martha? Brian asked, his voice deathly quiet. Clara Higgins is Martha's biological sister, Vance revealed. They share the same mother. Martha planned the swap before either child was even born. Brian closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep, steadying breath. So Daisy is Martha's biological daughter? We cannot confirm that without a DNA test, but the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming. Martha placed her own daughter with Silas, a man she knew she could control and pay off. Then she got herself hired by you and Mrs. Vanderbilt. She used her baby whisperer act to slowly poison your relationship with Jenny, preparing to frame Jenny as an evil imposter so you would cast her
out.
Then She miraculously guided you to find Daisy, her own daughter. So, Daisy would inherit the entire Vanderbilt fortune. And what about Jenny? Brian asked, his voice cracking slightly. My daughter. The initial DNA test you ran when you brought Daisy home, the one that said Daisy was a perfect match for you and your wife, was processed by a lab owned by a medical diagnostics company where Martha's ex-husband is a senior director. The sample for Daisy was switched with a reference sample of your own genetic material, or the results were simply forged. Vance placed a small, sterile plastic case on the desk. Inside were 2 cotton
Swabs.
I took these cheek swabs from you and Mrs. Vanderbilt while you were at the clinic, Vance said. We also have a swab from Jenny, and we managed to secure one from Daisy while she was being treated. I sent them to an independent, high-security lab in Switzerland. No electronic records, no local databases. The results will be flown back by courier in 6 hours. Brian stood up, walking to the large floor-to-ceiling window, overlooking the dark, manicured gardens. If the results are what we think they are, Martha has not only abused my daughter, she has attempted to steal my entire legacy, using her own child as a weapon. What do you want to do with her, sir? Vance asked. Brian's face was carved from granite. I don't just want her in prison, Vance.
I
want her to watch everything she built, every lie she spun, crumble to dust before her eyes. I want her to feel the exact terror and helplessness she inflicted on my 6-month-old daughter. The next morning, the rain poured heavily, streaking the high windows of the Vanderbilt estate with gray, cold tears. I was brought back from the clinic, wrapped in a warm, cashmere blanket. Eleanor refused to let anyone else hold me. She kept me pressed against her chest, her heart beating a steady, comforting rhythm against my cheek. Daisy was in the nursery, cared for by a temporary, highly vetted medical nurse, hired by Vance's team. At 10 a.m., the heavy double doors of the main library opened. Brian sat behind his desk. Beside him stood Vance and 2 burly men in dark suits. Eleanor sat in an armchair near the fireplace, holding me tightly. Martha was brought down by 2 security guards. Her clothes were slightly wrinkled from her night of confinement, but she had managed to smooth her hair. She still held her chin high, trying to project an aura of mystical, untouchable
calm.
Mr. Vanderbilt, Martha said, her voice smooth but slightly tight.
This
confinement is illegal. If you do not let me leave, my legal representatives will. Sit down, Martha, Brian said. The tone of his voice was not angry. It was the tone of a judge reading a death warrant. Martha hesitated, then sat in the leather chair opposite the desk. She looked at Eleanor, then at me. Mrs. Vanderbilt, surely you see the madness of this.
I
have only ever tried to help your family. The baby, Jenny, she is a dark presence. The tests we ran, Brian interrupted, sliding a thick, sealed document across the desk, were processed by the Zurich Genetic Institute. Martha's eyes flicked to the document. The word Zurich seemed to drain a fraction of the color from her lips. I have the DNA results right here, Brian said, tapping the folder. Would you like me to read them to you, or would you prefer to hear them from my investigator? Martha remained silent, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair so tightly. Her knuckles turned white. According to the results, Brian continued, his voice steady and cold. The baby we have been calling Jenny, the child you bruised, the child you systematically poisoned with veterinary anesthetics, is my biological daughter. She shares 99.9% of my and Eleanor's genetic markers. Eleanor let out a soft sob, pressing her lips against my forehead. I closed my eyes, a tear of relief slipping down my cheek. I was home. I was finally, truly, home. And Daisy. Brian's voice dropped to a whisper that felt like a blade. The baby you claimed was our real daughter, rescued from a trailer park, has absolutely zero genetic relation to me or Eleanor. However, her DNA was compared against a secondary database we accessed. Brian paused, leaning forward, his eyes locking onto Martha's terrified gaze. Daisy is a 99.9% match to you, Martha. She is your biological daughter. The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the crackle of the fireplace and the sound of the rain outside. Martha's face did not just go pale, it seemed to hollow out. The mystical, elegant persona she had cultivated for decades evaporated, leaving behind a desperate, cornered animal. No, she whispered. The lab made a mistake. It's a conspiracy. You're trying to frame me because you don't want to admit your daughter is. We also have Clara Higgins. Vance stepped forward, placing a satellite phone on the desk. She was detained by Spanish authorities at Madrid-Barajas airport 4 hours ago, attempting to board a flight to Switzerland. When presented with the wire transfer records and the prospect of extradition on charges of international kidnapping and child trafficking, she broke. She gave a full, videotaped confession. Vance pressed play on a tablet on the desk. Clara's face appeared on the screen, weeping, explaining how Martha had planned the swap, how Martha had paid her to switch the tags, and how Martha had used Silas to harbor her own child until the time was right to discover her. Martha stared at the screen. Her lips trembled. A small, ragged sound escaped her throat. You thought you were so clever, Eleanor said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and sorrow. You used your own flesh and blood as a pawn. You left your own daughter with a violent, abusive gambler just to set up a grand scheme to steal our fortune. What kind of mother does that? A mother who wanted her daughter to have everything. Martha suddenly screamed, her voice cracking, her face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated malice. She stood up, slamming her hands on the desk.
Yes.
I did it. What of it? Look at you, Eleanor. You have everything. You sit in your mansion dripping in diamonds, while my daughter was destined to grow up in a middle-class gutter.
I
gave her the Vanderbilt name. She would have been a queen. And what about my daughter? Eleanor cried, standing up holding me tight.
You
tried to destroy her. You poisoned her. You bruised her. She was in my way. Martha spat, glaring at me with eyes full of venom.
She
was supposed to be sent to Silas. Silas would have broken her. She would have died in some dirty trailer, and my Daisy would have inherited it all. If it weren't for this little monster, she's not a baby. I swear to you, she's not a baby. She looked at me, she knew. She's the one who did this. You are insane, Martha, Brian said, standing up. And your game is over. The heavy double doors of the library opened once more, and 2 police officers, accompanied by detectives from the state's Child Protection and Major Crimes Division, stepped inside. Martha Crane, the lead detective said, producing a pair of handcuffs. You are under arrest for attempted murder, systematic child abuse, kidnapping, conspiracy to commit fraud, and child trafficking. As the cold steel clicked around Martha's wrists, she didn't weep. She turned her head, staring at me with a gaze so full of hatred it could have withered flowers. Enjoy your victory, little demon, she hissed at me. You might have won this time, but my daughter is still here. She will always remind your parents of the monster they almost became because of me. Actually, Brian said, stopping the detectives. There is one more thing. He signaled Vance, who stepped out of the room and returned a moment later, carrying Daisy. Daisy was quiet, wrapped in a simple, soft blanket. We are not cruel, Martha, Brian said, looking at the innocent baby who had been used as a tool of greed. Daisy is innocent. She did not ask for any of this, but she cannot stay here. She is your daughter, and she will be placed in the custody of the state's social services until your trial. After that, she will likely be adopted by a family who will raise her without the poison of your ambition. Martha's eyes widened. For the first time, a look of genuine motherly panic crossed her face. No, don't put her in the system. She is a Vanderbilt. She deserves. She is a Crane, Eleanor said coldly. And she is lucky to be rid of you. As the police dragged Martha out of the room, her screams echoed down the long marble hallway, growing fainter and fainter until the heavy front doors slammed shut, sealing her fate forever. But the retribution was not yet complete. 2 days later, Brian's private security team, acting on information provided by Clara and Martha's financial records, descended upon the rundown trailer park 3 hours north. Silas, the gambler, was found in his trailer, surrounded by empty beer cans and betting slips. When the security team, accompanied by local state troopers, burst through his door, he tried to run, but he was quickly tackled to the sticky linoleum floor. He was arrested for child endangerment, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and receiving stolen funds. Because of his extensive prior criminal record and the severity of the charges, he was denied bail. He would spend the rest of his miserable life behind bars, never again able to raise his hand against an innocent child. The loop was closed. The dark future I had lived in my past life, the hunger, the neglect, The cold, dark room where my skull had cracked against a table was erased from existence. 3 months passed. The autumn leaves had turned a deep, golden red, carpeting the lawns of the Vanderbilt estate. In the sunlit nursery, the heavy lavender scent was gone, replaced by the fresh, crisp breeze of the changing season. I lay on a thick, soft rug, my tiny hands reaching for a wooden rattle. My wrist had healed completely, leaving no trace of the purple bruises that had once threatened to tear my life apart. Eleanor sat on the floor beside me, her hair tied back in a simple ponytail, a warm, genuine smile gracing her face. She reached down, gently tickling my tummy. I let out a bright, bubbling laugh, a real baby's laugh, free of the terror and despair that had haunted my early months. Brian walked into the nursery, carrying a tray with 2 cups of warm tea. He set it down on the changing table and walked over, dropping to his knees beside his wife. He reached down and let me grab his thumb. My grip was strong, healthy, and full of life. "She's growing so fast," Brian said softly, his eyes filled with a quiet pride.
Dr.
"Sterling says her developmental markers are off the charts." "She's perfect," Eleanor whispered, leaning her head against Brian's shoulder. "I look at her every day, and I still can't believe how close we came to losing her. If we hadn't looked closer, if we had let that monster take her away." "We didn't," Brian said, squeezing Eleanor's hand. "We found the truth.
And we
Will protect her for the rest of our lives." I looked up at my parents, my real, loving parents. In my past life, I had died in the dark, unloved, unwanted, and forgotten.
But
In this life, I had fought. I had used my tiny hands, my tears, and the memories of my suffering to shatter the web of lies that had bound my family. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the sun and the gentle touch of my mother's hand wash over me. The shadow of Silas's trailer park was gone.
the
Whispers of Martha were silent. I was Jenny Vanderbilt, and my story was finally, beautifully, just beginning.